Hi guys, Stefan Voss. So I figured I'm going to do a little bit of a sort of Cove short videos, just to maybe get a couple of concepts over, and see how, what you might be able to try out in the field, and I would love to keep this iterative. And today's topic is going to be KISS DR. We're going to embrace disaster recovery, but we also realize that keeping things simple, keep it simple, stupid, is the name of the game, because if you can reduce complexity, it's going to be a lot easier to recover from a disaster. Okay, so with that in mind, let's think about some of the myths here. So what you often will find, the Dattos of the world, the Veeams of the world, the you name it, that you need a lot of copies, primary copy on premise, in the vault, in a remote data center, and so forth, in order to do a proper disaster recovery and recovery or cyber resilience strategy, right? Reality is that is actually far from the truth. And I would argue the more complex the topology, the infrastructure, the harder it is for any human and any process to absorb and actually recover from a disaster. So what does it mean? Let's look at sort of the traditional approach. Now, this could be Veeam, this could be Datto, whatever, right? The list goes on and on. Any traditional non-cloud first data protection provider will have a topology that would look something like this. So you have a source. Source means, what am I backing up? The agent, right? So by the way, we definitely have an advantage at N-able, because we're so efficient in backing up the data that it's easy for us to back up desktop laptops. So the first question you should probably ask your competitors, apart from business critical servers, how well are they actually backing up desktop laptop workstations? Because I would argue, how are you going to recover from a disaster when you're not able to make me as the remote worker, hybrid remote worker, productive, right? So that makes no sense, right? So we have a real advantage that we can protect workloads, including SaaS, M365, critical servers, and desktop laptops, so you don't need like 3 tools to do the job. But that's just aside. So what normally these vendors will do, Veeam, Datto, is they're going to back up to a local box. So their backup software and the backup target will run on premise. With Datto, it's an integrated appliance. With Veeam, it's piece parts. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Your first copy number 1, is going to sit on the same network as the source, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to create a backup policy. A backup policy number 1, basically specify this is the workload or the thing I want to back up. Here's where I want to put it, the local storage. And this is how often I want to take the backup. So is it hourly? Is it daily? Whatever. And how long do I want to keep the data? So that's the retention piece. Generally, those are the attributes, 4 attributes to a policy. Okay, great. So here's the problem, right? If I buy a Datto box, it's going to have a limited amount of storage. It's a fact. You can go to the website, and when you are running out of storage, you have a problem, right? So I can buy another box, but now I need to manage that other box separately, and that is annoying, right? It adds management complexity. Or I can I basically just create this policy number 4, which is a tiering policy. You can think of this as, when I run out of space in my active tier, I will move the data into the cloud. Or I might actually use policy number 4 just simply to keep costs at bay, assuming that the cost of the storage for copy number 1 is higher than when you put it in the cloud. Okay, that's great. So that's understood. I got to put the data somewhere. And if I want long-term retention, or archival as we call it, I got to put it somewhere. And I don't have enough storage, right, on my primary storage. So the problem now is, how do you size that? So the problem we now run into is the amount of storage that I'm going to consume in this local box is determined by how well does this data dedupe. Like if it's encrypted, or if it's specific type of data, it will dedupe or deduplicate a lot less than other types of data. So that's it. In part is data source. how often do I take the backup, and how long do I want to keep it are the parameters of what generally it determines how much storage do I need in copy number one. So if you can imagine, all of your peers are out there sizing away, and then they just sell you box A or the little box or the big box or the whatever box, right? Just to get that primary, that local copy tier right. And then they need to factor in at what point do I actually move it into the cloud. Speaking of complexity, have you ever done sizing? No, you don't have to worry about sizing. That's the beauty of our architecture. We'll cover that in a minute. So you have different layers of complexity just by sizing this environment. And then, of course, the tiering policy needs to be managed in the UI. So normally these vendors would say, well, once the data is older than 30 days, please move it in the cloud. But guess what? Now it's going to take longer to restore that data than the local. The data in the active tier is going to be quicker to recover than the data that's out there in the cloud. So you already have a discrepancy. I don't know how you would reconcile that, but that's a fact. Okay, the second thing they're going to tell you oftentimes is you need another copy, because what if there's a flood in that data center? And the archives is not an appropriate solution because it doesn't cover the active tier, right? So now you need a second copy that does a box-to-box replication. So whether Veeam uses NetApp that replicates from one box to another, or you use Datto that replicates from one box, even if it's a virtual box that's in the cloud, still the same thing. You're now paying for two copies, right? Just to protect against this type of disaster in case there's a flood. Great. Okay, fair enough. But you're going to need to manage the associated policy number two. In other words, how often do I replicate from copy number one to this other box, right? Do I lock these copies that are in copy number two, that secondary data center? Do I lock them down? You may have heard the term immutability. So basically making it harder for me or the bad actor to delete the copies, the backup copies, right? Well, that needs to be specified, right? So there you go. There's your second policy, right? And then they will tell you, well, you need a vault, like an isolated copy, because copy number one and copy number two are very connected. So the source, copy number one, all on that local network, and then you have highly networked two data center setup. But the malware can just easily spread through there. So anything is game for the bad actors. So you typically want an isolated copy that's out of the reach of the bad actor. Well, now you need a third policy, right? Cyber recovery policy. Whether you take that from copy two or copy number one is irrelevant, by the way, but it is a different policy. Typically, you might take a copy every day, you put it in the vault, right? Because you don't need it every hour, and then you would lock it down, right? So just look at the complexity, right? We're talking about simplifying disaster recovery where we know it's not just technology, it's people, it's processes. You ideally have a plan of how to recover data from different types of disasters, and you're supposed to be practicing this stuff. Can you imagine just the complexity of this picture in front of you? How do you coordinate all that? How do you create an intelligent disaster recovery and incident response run book that covers these different scenarios? It's hard, right? How do you even have enough people to manage it? How do you orchestrate the patches for each one of these pieces of infrastructure just to make sure it's not exposed to malware? The list goes on and on and on, right? So I think you can really see that simplifying this picture inherently would simplify the disaster recovery approach. Okay, so there's a better way. And by the way, Cove Data Protection is not the only one doing it this way. Druva would pretty much tell the same story. So there's an architectural sort of movement to cloud first because it makes sense, right? You have the source, desktop, laptop, critical virtual machines, servers, you name it, right? SaaS workloads. And we will, in your backup policy, Cove backup policy, specify again, where am I taking the data from? I'm putting it into the cloud, right? Our cloud. And how often am I going to take the backup and how long do I want to keep it? But as you can see, there's no difference between the active tier or the archive tier, because it's irrelevant. We can give you any type of retention or any number of retention days, if you will, that you specify, all the way to unlimited, right? That's beautiful. You don't have to worry about where's the cutover. So it's one less policy to worry about. By the way, you don't have to patch the environment. Patch orchestration goes away. Now, if you want a second copy, we can accommodate that, right? So the local speed vault gives you the ability to create that second copy if you want to have it locally, but that's just it. It is just an attribute of that same policy, right? So what have I done? I've reduced the number of copies. So arguably that's going to reduce cost. I've really simplified 4 policies down to 1, and that inherently reduces the complexity of the entire disaster recovery topology. And when the disaster recovery topology is easier, the process of the disaster recovery is going to be easier as well, right? So your runbook will be simpler, and it's going to be a lot easier for a human being to actually do the actual recovery. Right? So that's the idea. Just a couple of thoughts on how there is an alternative approach. Don't be afraid of disaster recovery and fancy words like recovery time objective, RPO. That's just vendor speak to just kind of keep things confusing. Think about the beauty and the elegance of this architecture, how clean it is, and challenge the customer's thinking, right? How this will actually simplify their lives of focusing on, really practicing these drills to restore data, recover, and simplify your runbooks. So with that, thank you, and we'll move on to the next one in the next vid. See ya.